Hello everyone, welcome back to YouTube channel The Ultimate Audiobook. Today we will cover theme 4 of class 11th NCERT history textbook. So let's begin. The Central Islamic Lands. As we enter the 21st century, there are over 1 billion Muslims living in all parts of the world. They are citizens of different nations, speak different languages, and dress differently. The processes by which they became Muslims were varied, and so were the circumstances in which they went their separate ways. Yet the Islamic community has its roots in a more unified past, which unfolded roughly 1400 years ago in the Arabian Peninsula. In this chapter, we are going to read about the rise of Islam and its expansion over a vast territory extending from Egypt to Afghanistan, the core area of Islamic civilization from 600 to 1200. In these centuries, Islamic society exhibited multiple political and cultural patterns. The term Islamic is used here not only in its purely religious sense, but also for the overall society and culture historically associated with Islam. In this society, not everything that was happening originated directly from religion, but it took place in a society where Muslims and their faith were recognized as socially dominant. Non-Muslims always formed an integral, if subordinate, part of this society, as did Jews in Christendom. Our understanding of the history of the Central Islamic lands between 600 and 1200 is based on chronicles or tawarikh, which narrate events in order of time, and semi-historical works such as biographies, sira, records of the saying and doings of the Prophet, hadith, and commentaries on the Quran, tafsir. The material from which these works were produced was a large collection of eyewitness reports, akhbar, transmitted over a period of time either orally or on paper. The authenticity of each report, khabar, was tested by a critical method which traced the chain of transmission, isnad, and established the reliability of the narrator. Although the method was not foolproof, medieval Muslim writers were more careful in selecting their information and understanding the motives of their informants than were their contemporaries in other parts of the world. On controversial issues, they reproduced different versions of the same event as they found in their sources, leaving the task of judgment to their readers. Their description of events closer to their own times is more systematic and analytical and less of a collection of akhbar. Most of the chronicles and semi-historical works are in Arabic, the best being the Tarikh of Tabari, which has been translated into English in 38 volumes. Persian chronicles are few, but they are quite detailed in their treatment of Iran and Central Asia. Christian chronicles, written in Syriac, a dialect of Aramaic, are fewer, but they throw interesting light on the history of early Islam. Besides chronicles, we have legal texts, geographies, travelogues, and literary works such as stories and poems. Aramaic is a language related to Hebrew and Arabic. It has also been used in Ashokan inscriptions. Documentary evidence, fragmentary pieces of writing such as official orders or private correspondence is the most valuable for writing histories because it does not consciously refer to events and persons. It comes almost entirely from Greek and Arabic papyri, good for administrative history, and the Jangia records. Some evidence has emerged from archaeological excavations done at desert palaces, numismatic study of coins, and epigraphic study of inscriptions, sources which is of great value for economic history, art history, and for establishing names and dates. Proper histories of Islam began to be written in the 19th century by university professors in Germany and the Netherlands. Colonial interest in the Middle East and North Africa encouraged French and British researchers to study Islam as well. Christian priests, too, paid close attention to the history of Islam and produced some good work, although their interest was mainly to compare Islam with Christianity. These scholars, called Orientalists, are known for their knowledge of Arabic and Persian and critical analysis of original text. Ignaz Goldziher was a Hungarian Jew who studied at the Islamic College, Al-Azhar, in Cairo and produced path-breaking studies in German of Islamic law and theology. 20th century historians of Islam have largely followed the interest and methods of Orientalists. They have widened the scope of Islamic history by including new topics and by using allied disciplines such as economics, anthropology, and statistics, have refined many aspects of Orientalist studies. The historiography of Islam is a good example of how religion can be studied with modern historical methods by those who may not share the customs and beliefs of the people they are studying. The rise of Islam in Arabia, faith, community, and politics. During 612 to 32, the Prophet Muhammad preached the worship of a single God, Allah, and the membership of a single community of believers, Ummah. This was the origin of Islam. Muhammad was an Arab by language and culture and a merchant by profession. 6th century Arab culture was largely confined to the Arabian Peninsula and areas of southern Syria and Mesopotamia. The Arabs were divided into tribes, Kabila, each led by a chief who was chosen partly on the basis of his family connections but more for his personal courage, wisdom, and generosity, Murawa. Each tribe had its own god or goddess who was worshipped as an idol, Sanam, in a shrine. Many Arab tribes were nomadic, moving from dry to green areas of the desert in search of food, mainly dates, and fodder for their camels. Some settled in cities and practiced trade or agriculture. Muhammad's own tribe, Quraysh, lived in Mecca and controlled the main shrine there, a cube-like structure called Kaaba, in which idols were placed. Even tribes outside Mecca considered the Kaaba holy and installed their own idols at the shrine, making annual pilgrimages, Hajj, to the shrine. Mecca was located on the crossroads of a trade route between Yemen and Syria, which further enhanced the city's importance. The Meccan Shrine was a sanctuary haram, where violence was forbidden and protection given to all visitors. Pilgrimage and commerce gave the nomadic and settled tribes opportunities to communicate with one another and share their beliefs and customs. Although the polytheistic Arabs were vaguely familiar with the notion of a supreme God, Allah, possibly under the influence of the Jewish and Christian tribes living in their midst, their attachment to idols and shrines was more immediate and stronger. Tribes are societies organized on the basis of blood relationships. The Arab tribes were made up of clans or combinations of large families. Unrelated clans also merged to make a tribe stronger. Non-Arab individuals, Mawali, became members through the patronage of prominent tribesmen. Even after converting to Islam, the Mawali were never treated as equals by the Arab Muslims and had to pray in separate mosques. A 13th century painting from Ajaibul Makhlukat, depicting the artist's imagination of the Archangel Gabriel, Jibril, who brought messages to Muhammad. The first word he spoke was recite, Ikra, from which has come the word Quran. In Islamic cosmology, angels are one of the three intelligent forms of life in the universe. The other two are humans and jinns. Around 612, Muhammad declared himself to be the messenger, Rasul, of God who had been commanded to preach that Allah alone should be worshipped. The worship involved simple rituals such as daily prayers, salat, and moral principles such as distributing alms and abstaining from theft. Muhammad was to found a community of believers, Ummah, bound by a common set of religious beliefs. The community would bear witness, Sahada, to the existence of the religion before God as well as before members of other religious communities. Muhammad's message particularly appealed to those Meccans who felt deprived of the gains from trade and religion and were looking for a new community identity. Those who accepted the doctrine were called Muslims. They were promised salvation on the day of judgment, Qiyamah, and a share of the resources of the community while on earth. The Muslims soon faced considerable opposition from affluent Meccans who took offense to the rejection of their deities and found the new religion a threat to the status and prosperity of Mecca. In 622, Muhammad was forced to migrate with his followers to Medina. Muhammad's journey from Mecca, Hijrah, was a turning point in the history of Islam, with the year of his arrival in Medina marking the beginning of the Muslim calendar. Islamic calendar. The Hijri era was established during the Caliphate of Umar, with the first year falling in 622 C. A date in the Hijri calendar is followed by the letters AH. The Hijri year is a lunar year of 354 days, 12 months, Muharram to Dhul Hijjah, of 29 or 30 days. Each day begins at sunset and each month with the sighting of the crescent moon. The Hijri year is about 11 days shorter than the solar year. Therefore, none of the Islamic religious festivals, including the Ramjan, fast, Eid and Hajj, corresponds in any way to seasons. There is no easy way to match the dates in the Hijri calendar with the dates in the Gregorian calendar, established by Pope Gregory XIII in 1582 CE. One can calculate the rough equivalence between the Islamic H and Gregorian Christian C years with the following formulae. H into 32 upon 33 whole plus 622 equal to C. C minus 622 whole into 33 upon 32 equal to H. The survival of a religion rests on the survival of the community of believers. The community has to be consolidated internally and protected from external dangers. Consolidation and protection require political institutions such as states and governments, which are either inherited from the past, borrowed from outside, or created from scratch. In Medina, Muhammad created a political order from all three sources, which gave his followers the protection they needed as well as resolved the city's ongoing civil strife. The Ummah was converted into a wider community to include polytheists and the Jews of Medina under the political leadership of Muhammad. Muhammad consolidated the faith for his followers by adding and refining rituals such as fasting and ethical principles. The community survived on agriculture and trade, as well as an alms tax, zakat. In addition, the Muslims organized expeditionary raids on Meccan caravans and nearby oases. These raids provoked reactions from the Meccans and caused a breach with the Jews of Medina. After a series of battles, Mecca was conquered and Muhammad's reputation as a religious preacher and political leader spread far and wide. Muhammad now insisted on conversion as the sole criterion for membership of the community. In the harsh conditions of the desert, the Arabs attached great value to strength and solidarity. Impressed by Muhammad's achievements, many tribes, mostly Bedouins, joined the community by converting to Islam. Muhammad's alliances began to spread until they embraced the whole of Arabia. Medina became the administrative capital of the emerging Islamic State, with Mecca as its religious center. The Kaaba was cleansed of idols as Muslims were required to face the shrine when offering prayers. In a short space of time, Muhammad was able to unite a large part of Arabia under a new faith, community, and state. The early Islamic polity, however, remained a federation of Arab tribes and clans for a long time. The Caliphate: expansion, civil wars, and sect formation. After Muhammad's death in 632, no one could legitimately claim to be the next prophet of Islam. As a result, his political authority was transferred to the Ummah with no established principle of succession. This created opportunities for innovations but also caused deep divisions among the Muslims. The biggest innovation was the creation of the institution of Caliphate, in which the leader of the community, Amir al-Mu'minin, became the deputy Khalifa of the Prophet. The first four caliphs, 632 to 661, justified their powers on the basis of their close association with the Prophet and continued his work under the general guidelines he had provided. The twin objectives of the Caliphate were to retain control over the tribes constituting the Ummah and to raise resources for the state. Following Muhammad's death, many tribes broke away from the Islamic State. Some even raised their own prophets to establish communities modeled on the Ummah. The first caliph, Abu Bakr, suppressed the revolts by a series of campaigns. The second caliph, Umar, shaped the Ummah's policy of expansion of power. The caliph knew that the Ummah could not be maintained out of the modest income derived from trade and taxes. Realizing that rich booty, ghanima, could be obtained from expeditionary raids, the caliph and his military commanders mustered their tribal strength to conquer lands belonging to the Byzantine Empire in the west and the Sasanian Empire in the east. At the height of their power, the Byzantine and Sasanian empires ruled vast territories and commanded huge resources to pursue their political and commercial interests in Arabia. The Byzantine Empire promoted Christianity and the Sasanian Empire patronized Zoroastrianism, the ancient religion of Iran. On the eve of the Arab invasions, these two empires had declined in strength due to religious conflicts and revolts by the aristocracy. This made it easier for the Arabs to annex territories through wars and treaties. In three successful campaigns, 637 to 642, the Arabs brought Syria, Iraq, Iran, and Egypt under the control of Medina. Military strategy, religious fervor, and the weakness of the opposition contributed to the success of the Arabs. Further, campaigns were launched by the third caliph, Uthman, to extend the control to Central Asia. Within a decade of the death of Muhammad, the Arab Islamic State controlled the vast territory between the Nile and the Oxus. These lands remain under Muslim rule to this day. In all the conquered provinces, the caliphs imposed a new administrative structure headed by governors, amirs, and tribal chieftains, ashraf. The central treasury, Beit al-Mal, obtained its revenue from taxes paid by Muslims as well as its share of the booty from raids. The caliph's soldiers, mostly Bedouins, settled in camp cities at the edge of the desert, such as Kufa and Basra, to remain within reach of their natural habitat as well as the caliph's command. The ruling class and soldiers received shares of the booty and monthly payments. Ata. The non-Muslim population retained their rights to property and religious practices on payment of taxes. Kharaj and Jizya. Jews and Christians were declared protected subjects of the state, dhimmis, and given a large measure of autonomy in the conduct of their communal affairs. Political expansion and unification did not come easily to the Arab tribesmen. With territorial expansion, the unity of the Ummah became threatened by conflicts over the distribution of resources and offices. The ruling class of the early Islamic State comprised almost entirely the Quraysh of Mecca. The third caliph, Uthman, 644 to 656, also a Quraysh, packed his administration with his own mane to secure greater control. This further intensified the Meccan character of the state and the conflict with the other tribesmen. Opposition in Iraq and Egypt, combined with opposition in Medina, led to the assassination of Uthman. With Uthman's death, Ali became the fourth caliph. The rifts among the Muslims deepened after Ali 656 to 661 fought two wars against those who represented the Meccan aristocracy. Ali established himself at Kufa and defeated an army led by Muhammad's wife Aisha in the Battle of the Camel 657. He was, however, not able to suppress the faction led by Muawiyah, a kinsman of Uthman and the governor of Syria. Ali's second battle at Siffin, northern Mesopotamia, ended in a truce which split his followers into two groups. Some remained loyal to him, while others left the camp and came to be known as Kharjis. Soon after, Ali was assassinated by a Kharji in a mosque at Kufa. After his death, his followers paid allegiance to his son Hussein and his descendants. Muawiyah made himself the next caliph in 661, founding the Umayyad dynasty, which lasted till 750. After the civil wars, it appeared as if Arab domination would disintegrate. There were also signs that the tribal conquerors were adopting the sophisticated culture of their subjects. It was under the Umayyads, a prosperous clan of the Quraysh tribe, that a second round of consolidation took place. The Umayyads and the centralization of polity. The conquest of large territories destroyed the Caliphate based in Medina and replaced it with an increasingly authoritarian polity. The Umayyads implemented a series of political measures which consolidated their leadership within the Ummah. The first Umayyad Caliph, Muawiyah, moved his capital to Damascus and adopted the court ceremonies and administrative institutions of the Byzantine Empire. He also introduced hereditary succession and persuaded the leading Muslims to accept his son as his heir. These innovations were adopted by the caliphs who followed him and allowed the Umayyads to retain power for 90 years and the Abbasids for 2 centuries. The Umayyad state was now an imperial power, no longer based directly on Islam but on statecraft and the loyalty of Syrian troops. There were Christian advisors in the administration as well as Zoroastrian scribes and bureaucrats. However, Islam continued to provide legitimacy to their rule. The Umayyads always appealed for unity and suppressed rebellions in the name of Islam. They also retained their Arab social identity. During the reign of Abdul Malik 685 to 705 and his successors, both the Arab and Islamic identities were strongly emphasized. Among the measures Abdul Malik took were the adoption of Arabic as the language of administration and the introduction of an Islamic coinage. The gold dinar and silver dirham that had been circulating in the Caliphate were copies of Byzantine and Iranian coins, denarius and drachm, with symbols of crosses and fire altars, and Greek and Pahlavi, the language of Iran, inscriptions. These symbols were removed and the coins now carried Arabic inscriptions. Abdul Malik also made a highly visible contribution to the development of an Arab Islamic identity by building the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem. Abdul Malik's coinage reform. The three coin specimens show the transition from Byzantine to Arab Islamic coinage. On the second coin, the bearded and long-haired caliph is dressed in traditional Arab robes and is holding a sword. It is the first extant portrait of a Muslim. It is also unique because later there developed an antipathy towards the representation of living beings in art and craft. Abdul Malik's reform of coinage was linked with his reorganization of state finances. It proved so successful that for hundreds of years, coins were struck according to the pattern and weight of the third specimen. The Abbasid Revolution. For their success in centralizing the Muslim polity, the Umayyads paid a heavy price. A well-organized movement called Dawa brought down the Umayyads and replaced them with another family of Meccan origin, the Abbasids. In 750, the Abbasids portrayed the Umayyad regime as evil and promised a restoration of the original Islam of the Prophet, of the original Islam of the Prophet. The revolution led not only to a change of dynasty but changes in the political structure and culture of Islam. The Abbasid Uprising broke out in the distant region of Khurasan, eastern Iran, a 20-day journey from Damascus on a fast horse. Khurasan had a mixed Arab-Iranian population which could be mobilized for various reasons. The Arab soldiers here were mostly from Iraq and resented the dominance of the Syrians. The civilian Arabs of Khorasan disliked the Umayyad regime for having made promises of tax concessions and privileges, which were never fulfilled. As for the Iranian Muslims, Mawali, they were exposed to the scorn of the race-conscious Arabs and were eager to join any campaign to oust the Umayyads. The Abbasids, descendants of Abbas, the Prophet's uncle, mustered the support of the various dissident groups and legitimized their bid for power by promising that a Messiah, Mahdi, from the family of the Prophet Al-Bayt would liberate them from the oppressive Umayyad regime. Their army was led by an Iranian slave, Abu Muslim, who defeated the last Umayyad Caliph, Marwan, in a battle at the river Zab. Under Abbasid rule, Arab influence declined while the importance of Iranian culture increased. The Abbasids established their capital at Baghdad, near the ruins of the ancient Iranian metropolis, Ctesiphon. The army and bureaucracy were reorganized on a non-tribal basis to ensure greater participation by Iraq and Khorasan. The Abbasid rulers strengthened the religious status and functions of the Caliphate and patronized Islamic institutions and scholars. But they were forced by the needs of government and empire to retain the centralized nature of the state. They maintained the magnificent imperial architecture and elaborate court ceremonials of the Umayyads. The regime, which took pride in having brought down the monarchy, found itself compelled to establish it again.